Hello, everyone. Welcome to our online video series, Reading Hope in Trying Times. Our guest today is Jim Wallis. Jim is a globally respected writer, teacher, preacher, and justice advocate who believes the gospel of Jesus must be transformed for its cultural and political captivities. He's a New York Times bestselling author, widely recognized public theologian, renowned speaker, and regular international commentator on ethics and public life. He's the founder, president, and editor-in-chief of Sojourners and is the author of 12 books, including Americans' Original Sin, God's Politics, The Great Awakening, and The Call to Conversion. He served on President Obama's White House Advisory Council on faith-based and neighborhood partnerships and has taught faith and public life courses at Harvard and Georgetown University. It's such an honor to have you here with us today, Jim.
Great to be with you. Let's add, I'm also a Little League baseball coach for 22 seasons, 11 years with my sons, Luke and Jack.
That's a great commitment.
Best part of my bio, I think. The thing that I love most about all the things that I do.
So this pandemic has affected all of us in many different ways. Would you just like to share a little bit about how it's affected you personally in your work and what other reflections you'd like to share with us?
Well, I was actually back to baseball for a minute. My wife Joy and I were in Florida with Luke for his usual college baseball spring training. And we had a week of play before the season began. He's a senior. So it was his last semester at Haverford College and graduating, and his last baseball season since when he was 5 years old with the Little League. And all of a sudden this all hit while we were down there. And everything got closed, and schools and baseball seasons. And so he's here with us. And, he's not getting to be part of his senior semester at college and commencement and his last baseball season. So that's a loss for him, but he's putting that in a much larger context of all the losses we see around the city and the country and around the world. Jack, my 16-year-old, is also home with us. They're very happy they're home together, which makes it a lot easier. He lost his baseball season too, but he's helping his friends make videos who want to play baseball in college like he does, and they're all sending videos to these coaches. He's a catcher, but he's also a videographer, so he's helping as he can with so we're having good times together as a family and being very conscious of all around. The Sojourners is in the middle of all this, of course, and we have every Friday noon Zoom call for a lot of faith leaders across a broad spectrum, heads of denominations and faith-based organizations and pastors. And it's been a very good resourcing, they say, and refreshing call. Every week we talk about how to take faith visual, how to take love viral along with this virus, and ideas and inspiring each other and supporting each other, and also prayer requests, because all of us are being touched personally by this. My sister has it, and her husband, and many of her kids, and I get pings every day, all day on my phone, text messages about my family talking to her, and that's happening to all of us. We all have our little lists by our prayer vigil list beside our computers at our desks. And so we've had intercession for faith leaders to make prayer requests for themselves, which they often don't get to do. So talking together, praying together, strategizing together, it's been a very powerful time for church leaders to come together around this time. Because our vocation is really to prevent physical distancing, which is necessary for our health and saving lives, to prevent that from becoming social isolation. How do we stand apart and yet do more and more social solidarity together? We just finished Holy Week. I'm not sure when this will come out, but The image that struck me on Good Friday was this, you can't see my hands, but here's Jesus stretched out with his hands nailed to a cross, saying to a coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic world, I can't stop your suffering, but I'm with you in it. And then Easter, his hands are beckoning, saying, the resurrected Christ, I can make all things new. Join me and let's make so many things new that have been revealed to us in this crisis. Easter was never a time to go back to normal. It's not what Easter is. Easter is, let's make things new. And so we've been shown, laid bare really, all the things that are so wrong and unjust and brutal, the inequities, the unequal suffering of this disease. Racism and poverty are preconditions, really, for getting this disease. 3 times likely to contract it if you're African American, 6 times more likely to die if you're African American. So how do we acknowledge and fix these things going forward? I think a lot of people might understand now how universal health care is good for the common good and the common health for all of us. Steady incomes to stabilize the economy. I'm very lucky to have a house here. I'm talking to you in a house. We got houses, and my wife brought in food this morning. Many people don't have safe places or spaces or can't even social distance, and they don't have enough food. So this virus can show us who we are, who we were before the virus, and how we can be different afterwards. So we're learning all those things, and it's Sojourners trying to share them with a larger and larger audience of people who are looking for, I think, inspiration and sustenance and some hope. And my own team, my own staff, we're all like this, sheltering alone with our families. And we talked today's Zoom call to see each other's faces, which was great. And how can we take care of each other? Parents that are got little kids at home now all of a sudden that need love and care and attention and need homeschooling. And by the way, I wasn't ever good in that subject. And so how do we take care of each other as a staff? So how do we impact the churches and the state? We're organizing around concrete things like SNAP, nutrition benefits, and immigrant coverage in these new bills. We're moving quickly as a fake news, which doesn't happen too often. Churches move fast, say to senators and Congress people, we want you to deal with vulnerable people now. So we're doing that up on the Hill, all via Zoom.
Well, I'm sorry to hear about your sister, and I really pray for her and her family's health during all of this.
She's getting better.
And I think what you're doing on those Friday sessions has got to be really helpful. And so thank you for doing that. There must be some great...
When you have the National Association of Evangelicals, National Council of Churches, Catholic Charities, all on the same call, this is a good thing.
That is really a good thing. Not easily accomplished, I can imagine.
No.
So there must be some wonderful stories that you're hearing too out of that of things that are happening, good things that people are doing, new things that people are doing. Anything from there that you'd like to share?
Oh, well, just on our staff call, one of our editors, he's remote anyway in New York, and his wife is a resident, medical doctor resident. And of course, she's in the middle of all this, risking her life every day, as all of our healthcare workers are, and told the story of a pregnant woman who was about to deliver, and they both, in the middle of all this, and the baby survived, and she got COVID, and now she's surviving too, and mother and child look like they're going to be okay. So that was in our Stories of Hope section. My brother was, visually tying into his Jesuit congregation in Detroit, where he lived for a long time. And the pastor, the priest, shared this in tears, this powerful story of a man in their congregation who was dying of the virus, and there were short ventilators, and he gave up his ventilator for a mother who needed one.
Wow.
And literally gave his life, and didn't make any of the news, but this Jesuit priest is telling that story in Mass, and tears in his eyes. So this is showing our better angels. We often see our worst demons and our polarization. So this is who we are in this crisis, and who we work with and alongside, and for whom, will change how we come out of this. This will change us. It will change us. It'll be different. And so how we act during this time, how we lead, how we act, who we stand alongside, who we take care of, will shape who we are going forward. So I want to believe and trust that God can bring out so much in us and between us. And particularly if we focus on the most vulnerable. That's key for all of us.
Well, that ventilator story is the type of news that we should be hearing more of, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are an awful lot of good things that have happened. And I totally agree with what you're saying. It's like, this times of stress tend to bring out change and bring out opportunities for learning and for good. And, let's hope that we all do learn from this as individuals and societies and countries and religions.
I think there are three roles in particular in response to what you're talking about that we should do for the faith community. Three key roles here, I think, in the weeks and months ahead. One is we have to put our moral authority behind the docs, the doctors and scientists who are telling us that we have to maintain this discipline of social distancing that literally is, as they say, flattening the curve and saving lives. We have to resist any political motivated or get the economy going thing that reopens too quickly. We have to make sure that we're behind, as churches and church leaders, behind the doctors and scientists when they tell us what we should be doing. Number two, we're the ones that have to, while practicing physical distancing, we have to be innovative about how to promote our solidarity with each other so it doesn't lead to social isolation. Too many people are alone. So how do we fulfill our vocation to prevent social isolation? And three, we have to focus on, Jesus said, the least of these are always the most important. That's what he said over and over again. Washington, D.C., where I am right now, the least of these are the least important. So how do we change that as they make decisions about bills and legislation and who's included and who's not in the benefits? So I think those three things: get behind the docs and scientists, make sure the physical distancing isn't creating social isolation, or where it is we go there visually in all kinds of creative ways. And then third, how do we make sure that those who are going to suffer the most because of their vulnerability and lack of access to good health and food and space, how do we protect them? Because that's what Jesus tells us to always do.
So one of the topics we've been chatting about in this series is how God has supported us through challenging times in our past. And you and I have been around the block. Our hair color and lack thereof can tell that story. Maybe you could share a little bit with us in terms of how God supported you through challenging times.
I remember when the election happened in 16. Everybody was calling me because they were like black pastors calling worried about the racialized policing of their youth group in black churches. immigrant families calling whether we'll all be together at night for dinner because of fears of deportation, churches saying, I don't know what to do, I'm just reacting. And I remember I was getting calls like I was supposed to know what to do, and I didn't. When you're along the gray hair, when you were doing social activism for a long time, people think you're going to know what to do, and I didn't know what to do. And I'd be woken up every morning, 4:30, 5 o'clock, and go downstairs where I am now, and not even knowing what scriptures to turn to or how to pray or what to pray. I had heads of churches saying, Jim, is this a Bonhoeffer moment in terms of the 1930s? And I found in the book of Acts, where they were early disciples responding to their own initial crisis. And I was just struck how again and again, you find scriptures that you've read before, but when you bring new questions or new circumstances, they become new too, right? So, and I noticed how that Peter and John coming out of the gate, this man who's disabled and he's asking for help and money. He says, gold and silver have I none, says Peter, but in the name of Jesus, stand up and walk. And he did, and it created this whole controversy. Everything was done in the name of Jesus, healing and teaching, everything. And so Bishop Michael Curry and I got together, and we've become very close in this kind of time. And that's what we got struck by, where Jesus gets squeezed out of our lives. And how we decided we had to figure out how to reclaim Jesus. So we did this declaration called Reclaiming Jesus. And my good young video team made a video of that, signed by 20 elders, meaning we're all just old people. And it was picked up by 5 million people around the world. And now this virus has hit, and even more, that message, what does it mean to come back to Jesus in a crisis? That's what I was taught as a kid, and lost my faith, left my faith, but finally it came back to Jesus. So what does it mean in a crisis like this? We had a political crisis long before we had this virus crisis, and both are still going on. So what does it mean to really, did Jesus mean what he said? What did he say? Did he mean it? What does that mean for us? I mean, I'm asking that question now every day. What Jesus did this, said this, what does that mean? That's why I wrote this book called Christ in Crisis. What does it mean to reclaim Jesus? And all it is questions he asked, that he either asked or were asked of him. Who is my neighbor? What does that mean? What is truth? Don't be afraid, he says over and over again. And yet our politics says be afraid all the time, right? So I think the questions of Jesus and that he either asked or prompted, to me, are right at the heart of it. So I keep going back to that. And I remember when I was a kid, I was told the story of the disciples in the boat, and storms are all around, and the boat's thrashing, and they think they see someone, and they're afraid. And he says, it's okay, it's me. Jesus said, it is I. And he gets in the boat with them. And my cycle teacher said, whenever there's a hard time, get Jesus in your boat.
There you go. There's some good advice.
So I want to figure out in the corona crisis, what does it mean, or in this political crisis in this nation, to get Jesus in our boat?
That's great advice. So religion is very difficult for us as a society to talk about, and politics is very difficult for us as a society to talk about. And you've talked about the intersection of those extensively, and I think more effectively than anyone else I can think of, in terms of your books, your speaking, your actions. So I'd love to hear some of your advice for the rest of us as to how we can speak and act into those areas today.
Well, our vocation at Sojourners is to talk about the things you're not supposed to talk about at a party or a Thanksgiving dinner, faith and politics, and even to talk about them both and put them together. So it's a vocation that's always interesting. And I particularly like talking about those things with a lot of young people who would be in this new category of religious affiliation that's called none of the above. They check that box, none of the above. The nuns, N-O-N-E-S. Remember I was at Georgetown where I teach sometimes, and I said, I love the nuns, and all these Catholic sisters said, well, thank you very much. I said, well, I love you guys too, the Catholic sisters who've been at our core for a long time at Sojourners. In fact, when I used to go out to speak at these evangelical colleges, there'd be 2 rows of Catholic sisters there in the room, and I'd say, sisters, why are you here? And they would say, well, Jim, we're local. I said, well, I figured that, but why here? Jim, this is a very conservative place. I said, yeah, I know. That's why I came. We thought somebody should have your back. So I've had Catholic nuns as bodyguards for years. So this has been
That's
great.
awesome.
But now the N-O-N-E-S, I'm in rooms during the book tour where they all were formerly Baptist, Presbyterian, Catholic, formerlies. And yet when I talked about this Jesus, what did he say? And what did he do? And how that turns everything literally upside down. They get very, the room lights up and the questions come. And how do I engage with that? And then their stories come up. How that for so many, they couldn't endure anymore what they called the hypocrisy in their religious worlds, or the lack of care for this massive injustice that they felt all around them. But when they hear how this Jesus wants to change everything, our lives and our societies, it could get very exciting to them. So I love talking to the nuns out there, or in bookstore audiences. They're often in the back, and at the end they say, well, I'm not sure I'm religious, but I was hoping I'd feel comfortable tonight, and included, but I really did. This talk about religion and politics. So I'm finding there's a real hunger around the country for a new conversation about Jesus. That I'm finding, Muslim African-American women saying, I never felt included in any of these conversations. And this is a conversation that I want to be a part of too. So I walk out of this is before the coronavirus hit. I walked out of these meetings for Christ in Crisis feeling very encouraged and hopeful. But then you go back and turn on the news in your hotel room, and it's very depressing and discouraging for people. So I think that kind of hope is what is, I learned my theology of hope in South Africa from people like Desmond Tutu. So I learned hope isn't the same as optimism. Optimism is a mood or a feeling or a kind of a personality type sometimes. How things look today. Hope is a choice. It's a decision we make because of this thing that we call faith. And to me, that's so crucial right now. Hebrews says faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Or my paraphrase of that is that hope is really believing in spite of the evidence, and then watching the evidence change. And our particular role as people of faith is to bring that hope. So into a coronavirus, what do we do? Into a political situation where fear and hatred and violence are promoted all the time. What do we do? And I think that's what people are hungry for and looking for. Something that they can put some, as Desmond Tutu would tell me, you talk about the world that you believe in and that is to come, and then you bet your life on it. You bet your life on it.
There you go. That's very cool. So switching to more of a kind of tactical level, are there any things that you're doing as Sojourners, initiative, programs, pivots that are new because of this?
Well, we try to be very practical and not just, I always want to be, deeply theological, because not more, theological more than just political. But then I want to apply that very practically. For example, in the book, I talk a lot, in America's Original Sin, you mentioned all over that book, is about how this is about something as basic as the first chapter of Genesis, about being made in the image of God, imago Dei, all of us, created to be stewards together of God's earth, together as those made in the image and likeness of God. Well, applying that to right now, when you are trying to suppress somebody's vote because of the color of their skin, this isn't just a political crisis. This is, you're assaulting, throwing away the image of God. That's what's at stake here. So we've created this whole campaign called Lawyers and Collars. Collars meaning clergy. Clergy going into polling places with the lawyers or into secretaries of state's offices saying we want a free and fair and now safe election. There are people who will use the coronavirus to try and steal this election.
We've seen it already happening, haven't we?
It's already happening, right? So that was already happening, and they're going to use this. So we're gonna really make it a faith issue to protect free, fair, and safe elections. So pastors all over the country in key states. We had a big call this morning with 75 pastors in a key state that will determine the election, and how, as clergy, we're going to stand in there and help protect the vote. So imago Dei means all kinds of things. One is protect the vote in this election. So we're in the middle of Lawyers and Collars, and that goes on despite the coronavirus. We're taking it all virtual. Prayer meetings, prayer breakfasts are now virtual on the screen.
Excellent, excellent. So are there some resources that we can also share with other people about that effort?
Oh yeah, just our website. We're doing this with Barbara Williams Skinner, National African American Clergy Network, that she leads in a wonderful way. But sojo.net, sojo.net, and there's all the sojo.net/coronavirus is all we're doing around the coronavirus. And then Lawyers and Collars is about the voter protection campaign. We've got a pandemic sermon every week. I did a conversation with Michael Curry for that first week, Bishop Michael Curry, and then with Richard Rohr last week, a conversation about what a sermon would be like in this pandemic time. And we've had medical experts like Leanna Wen, who's an amazing former Baltimore Health Commissioner, all the TV stations. She was pregnant and about to deliver when this crisis hit. Larry Brilliant, who's the smallpox, he helped with the whole smallpox epidemic years ago. So really people who are expert and who are helping us to take this to a better and different place. So it's called the Soul of the Nation podcast. And so Sojourners, what we do is we do a lot of messaging So our website is for resources that people can hopefully be served by. And then we mobilize, and mobilizing is lawyers and callers on the election. And then we also convene, bring people together who may be different on a lot of things, but who want to say government shouldn't cut their budgets at the point of poor people. That's the wrong way to go about fiscal responsibility. So how do you bring people together? How do you mobilize them? And how do you message that movement with something that puts our faith ahead of politics? Faith should shape our politics, not the other way around. So at that cocktail party where you can't talk about the stuff, I want to say I'm a person of faith, so I want faith to shape my politics and not the other way around.
Wonderful advice. So Jim, I really want to thank you for spending some time sharing your insights, your wisdom. This has all been really valuable information that I know our listeners are going to appreciate. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Well, it's my blessing. People of faith and sometimes people of no faith or not sure what they believe, or people of just moral sensibility are wanting to get past this terrible polarization. So I often say, don't go left, don't go right, go deeper. Let's go deeper and figure out how to move forward here.
Let's go deeper. That's great advice. Well, thank you again, Jim.
Thank you. My blessing.